What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks into what he thinks is a routine morning show interview, only to find himself ambushed by a host with a personal vendetta? The tension in the Good Morning America studio was so thick, you could cut it with a knife as Robert Downey Jr. sat across from George Stephanopoulos, completely unaware that he was about to become the target of the most aggressive interview takedown in morning television history. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that left viewers stunned and the entertainment industry buzzing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really went down. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios in New York. Robert Downey Jr. had arrived early, his usual charming demeanor intact as he greeted the production staff with genuine warmth. He was there to promote his latest project, expecting the typical softball questions about his career comeback and his time as Iron Man. What he didn't know was that George Stephanopoulos had spent the previous evening poring over old tabloid stories and controversial interviews, armed with a folder full of ammunition he was determined to use. As the cameras rolled and the familiar Good Morning America theme music faded, George's smile seemed forced, almost predatory. "Good morning. I'm here with Robert Downey Jr.," he began, his voice carrying an undertone that immediately put the actor on edge. "Robert, thanks for joining us today. I have to say it's fascinating having you here, especially given some of the things that have surfaced recently about your past." Robert's eyebrows furrowed slightly. This wasn't the warm welcome he'd expected. "George, good morning. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I'm happy to be here talking about the new film." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm referring to," George pressed, leaning forward with the intensity of a prosecutor cross-examining a hostile witness. "Let's talk about your history with substances, your multiple arrests, the chaos you brought to film sets in the early 2000s. How do we know you won't just relapse again and disappoint everyone who's invested in you?" The question hit the studio like a lightning bolt. Robert's expression shifted from confusion to controlled anger in milliseconds. "Excuse me. I came here to discuss my current work, not to relitigate a chapter of my life that I've been transparent about for over a decade." George wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Robert's discomfort. "But that's just it, isn't it? You've built this whole redemption narrative, this comeback story, but how convenient that everyone just forgets about the real damage you caused, the productions you nearly destroyed, the people whose careers suffered because of your behavior." "George, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding about what this interview was supposed to be," Robert said, his voice steady, but his jaw visibly tightening. "I've taken full responsibility for my past mistakes. I've made amends where possible. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here." "What I'm trying to accomplish," George replied, his voice rising slightly, "is getting some honest answers instead of the rehearsed publicity responses you give everyone else. Our viewers deserve to know who they're really supporting when they buy tickets to your movies." The actor's famous charm was completely gone now, replaced by something much more dangerous. "Honest answers? You want honest answers? Here's an honest answer for you, George. I came here in good faith to discuss my work, and instead you're ambushing me with tabloid garbage from 20 years ago. What's your real agenda here?" "My agenda is journalism," George shot back, his voice dripping with condescension. "You know, actually asking the tough questions instead of just lobbing softballs like everyone else does. Maybe you're just not used to dealing with a real journalist anymore." That last comment was the spark that lit the fuse. Robert's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of quiet intensity that made him so compelling on screen. "A real journalist? Is that what you call this ambush? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a desperate ratings grab from someone whose career peaked in the Clinton administration." The insult landed like a physical blow. George's face flushed red, and for a moment, his professional composure cracked completely. "How dare you question my credentials? I've been doing this longer than you've been sober." "There it is," Robert said, a bitter smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The real George Stephanopoulos. Tell me, do you treat all your guests this way, or am I special? Did I do something to offend you personally, or is this just how you get your kicks these days? The tension in the studio was suffocating. Camera operators were glancing nervously at their director, unsure whether they should keep rolling. The production staff stood frozen, watching what was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview transform into something much more volatile. George tried to regain his footing, but his mask was slipping. I treat my guests with the respect they deserve based on their actions and their honesty. And frankly, Robert, your history speaks for itself. My history, Robert repeated slowly, his voice growing colder with each word. Let's talk about history, George. Let's talk about your history of using your platform to settle personal scores and boost your own ego at your guests' expense. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. George's eyes flashed with fury, and any pretense of professional journalism evaporated completely. You don't know what you're talking about. I've built a career on integrity and asking the questions that matter. Integrity. Robert laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is what you call integrity? Sandbagging a guest who came here to promote a film? Using your position to humiliate someone for your own twisted satisfaction? If this is your idea of integrity, George, then I feel sorry for anyone who has to work with you. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and both men seemed to have forgotten they were on live television. George's next words would push things past the point of no return, setting up a clash that would leave one of them walking off the set and the other scrambling to salvage what was left of the interview. George leaned back in his chair, a smug expression spreading across his face as he prepared to deliver what he clearly thought would be the killing blow. You know what, Robert? Maybe the problem isn't my questions. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle the truth about yourself. Maybe you're still the same unstable person you always were, just better at hiding it now. The words hit the studio like a bomb. Robert went completely still, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have. What did you just say to me? George, apparently mistaking Robert's quiet response for weakness, doubled down. You heard me. All this talk about growth and redemption, but here you are losing your temper on live television just because someone asked you a few hard questions. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Hard questions. Robert's voice was still dangerously quiet. Is that what you're calling this character assassination? Because let me tell you something, George. I've sat through actual hard questions from real journalists. I've been grilled by people who knew how to do their job without resorting to personal attacks. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. Oh, please, George scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Don't try to turn this around on me. I'm not the one with the track record of meltdowns and arrests. I'm not the one who had to be carried off movie sets because I couldn't handle my responsibilities. That was the moment Robert Downey Jr.'s famous patience finally snapped. He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with enough force to bump into the backdrop behind him. You know what, George? I'm done. I'm done pretending this is a legitimate interview. I'm done sitting here while you try to destroy me for whatever sick satisfaction you're getting out of this. George's eyes lit up with something that looked almost like glee. Running away? That's your solution? Just like you ran away from your problems with drugs and alcohol. I didn't run away from anything, Robert shot back, his voice finally rising to match the anger that had been building inside him. I faced my demons head-on. I did the work. I rebuilt my life and my career from the ground up. But you wouldn't know anything about that kind of courage, would you, George? When was the last time you took a real risk? When was the last time you had to fight for anything? I fight for the truth every single day, George replied. But his voice lacked conviction now. He seemed to realize that he might have pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. The truth. Robert laughed bitterly. You wouldn't recognize the truth if it walked up and introduced itself. You're so busy trying to tear people down that you've forgotten what actual journalism looks like. Tell me, George, what exactly are you trying to prove here? That you can break down a guest who came here in good faith. Congratulations. Mission accomplished. The production staff was in full panic mode now. The director was frantically gesturing to the camera operators, unsure whether to cut to commercial or keep rolling. This was live television gold, but it was also a complete disaster. George tried to regain control of the situation. Robert, if you would just sit down and answer the questions instead of having a tantrum, we could actually have a productive conversation. A tantrum? Robert's eyes blazed with fury. You think this is a tantrum? Let me show you what a real reaction looks like when someone crosses every line of professional decency. You want to talk about my past? Fine. Let's talk about yours. Let's talk about how you've turned this show into your personal playground where you get to play judge and jury with people's lives. You're out of line, George warned. But there was a tremor in his voice now. I'm out of line. Robert stepped closer to the desk, his presence suddenly filling the entire studio. You ambush me with 20-year-old tabloid stories. You question my sobriety. You attack my character on live television. And I'm the one who's out of line. The hypocrisy is staggering even for you. George was visibly struggling now, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized he'd lost complete control of the interview. I was simply asking legitimate questions about your fitness to be a role model for young people. Role model questions. Robert's voice was dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call it when you try to humiliate someone on national television? Because from where I stand, the only person in this studio who shouldn't be a role model for anyone is you. What kind of example are you setting? That it's okay to abuse your power as long as you can hide behind the pretense of journalism. The accusation struck home. George's face went from red to pale in seconds. I have never abused my position. Everything I do is in service of informing the public. Informing the public about what exactly? Robert demanded. About how to destroy someone's reputation for ratings. About how to use your platform to settle personal grudges. Because that's all this is, isn't it, George? This isn't about my past or my fitness as a role model. This is about you needing to feel powerful, needing to prove that you can still matter in a world that's largely moved on from whatever relevance you think you once had. The words hung in the air like poison. George opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely shaken. Robert pressed his advantage. You know what the really sad part is? You actually used to be a decent journalist. I remember watching you years ago back when you cared more about getting the story right than getting the story sensational. What happened to that person, George? When did you decide that destroying people on television was more important than actually informing your audience? I haven't changed, George managed to say, but his voice was weak now. Defensive. Haven't you? Robert shook his head sadly. Because the George Stephanopoulos I remember wouldn't have stooped to this level. He wouldn't have needed to ambush a guest to feel relevant. He wouldn't have confused cruelty with courage or sadism with journalism. The studio had gone completely silent except for the hum of the cameras and the barely audible whispers of the crew. George sat behind his desk looking smaller than he had at the start of the interview while Robert stood over him like an avenging angel. Here's the thing, George, Robert continued, his voice now calm, but still carrying an edge of steel. I came here to talk about art, about creativity, about the projects I'm passionate about. Instead, you decided to turn this into some kind of twisted therapy session where you get to play the role of my judge and executioner. Well, I've got news for you. I don't need your approval. I don't need your validation. And I sure as hell don't need to sit here and be insulted by someone who's clearly working through his own issues. George made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Robert, I think you're overreacting. These are standard questions that any public figure should be prepared to answer. Standard questions? Robert's eyebrows shot up. George, I've done thousands of interviews over the years. I've been asked about my past by everyone from Barbara Walters to Howard Stern. I've never had anyone approach it with the kind of malicious intent you've shown here today. This wasn't journalism, George. This was a public execution, and you were so excited to pull the trigger that you forgot to check if your gun was loaded. The metaphor hit George like a slap across the face. His mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find a response. But Robert wasn't finished. The actor had found his rhythm now, and 20 years of media training combined with natural charisma had turned him into an unstoppable force. You want to know what's really disturbing about this whole thing, George? Robert continued, his voice carrying the weight of genuine disappointment. It's not just that you ambushed me. It's that you clearly planned this. You sat in some meeting, or maybe just alone in your office, and you decided that today was the day you were going to try to destroy Robert Downey Jr. on live television. What kind of person makes that choice? George finally found his voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. I was just doing my job. Your job. Robert let out a laugh that had no warmth in it whatsoever. George, your job is supposed to be informing the public, not satisfying your own psychological needs at your guest's expense. But you know what? I almost feel sorry for you because anyone watching this can see exactly what's happening here. They can see a desperate man trying to feel relevant by tearing down someone who's actually accomplished something with their second chance. The color drained from George's face completely. You can't talk to me like that. This is my show. Your show. Robert's eyes flashed dangerously. Well then, congratulations, George. This is your show. And this is what you've chosen to do with it. Instead of enlightening your audience or providing them with meaningful content, you've decided to turn it into your personal coliseum where you get to feed Christians to the lions for entertainment. That's enough, George said, but his voice cracked on the words. Oh no, George. I don't think it is enough, Robert replied, stepping even closer to the desk. Because I think your viewers deserve to know exactly what kind of person is sitting behind that desk every morning pretending to be a journalist while actually just being a bully with a television show. The cameramen were still rolling, capturing every devastating word, every micro-expression of defeat that crossed George's face. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong anymore. This was a complete annihilation of everything George thought he represented. You know what the most pathetic part is? Robert continued relentlessly. I actually respected you once. I thought you were one of the good ones. Someone who understood that with great power comes great responsibility. But instead, you've chosen to use your platform to humiliate people who trusted you enough to sit in that chair. How many other guests have you done this to, George? How many other people have walked out of here feeling violated and betrayed? I treat all my guests fairly, George managed to say, but even he didn't sound convinced. Fairly? Robert shook his head in disgust. George, if this is your idea of fair treatment, then I seriously question your understanding of basic human decency. You've taken someone who came here in good faith and turned them into your personal punching bag. And for what? Ratings? Some twisted sense of satisfaction? The applause of people who enjoy watching others suffer. George tried one more desperate gambit. The public has a right to know about the people they're supporting. Your past behavior affects your credibility as a public figure. My past behavior? Robert's voice rose to match his anger. Let's talk about behavior, George. Let's talk about the behavior you've exhibited here today. Let's talk about ambushing guests, about weaponizing personal trauma for entertainment, about using your position of power to settle whatever personal scores you think you need to settle. If we're talking about credibility and public trust, maybe you should look in a mirror." The studio had gone dead silent, except for Robert's voice echoing off the walls. Even the crew had stopped whispering, too transfixed by the complete destruction of their host to do anything but watch. "Here's what's going to happen, George," Robert said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper again. "I'm going to walk out of here, and you're going to have to figure out how to explain to your producers, your network, and your audience why you just committed professional suicide on live television. And every time someone asks you about this moment, you're going to have to live with the knowledge that you had Robert Downey Jr. in your studio, and instead of having a meaningful conversation, you chose to reveal exactly who you really are." "You can't just walk out," George said desperately. "We're live. You have obligations." "Obligations?" Robert laughed. And this time there was genuine mirth in it, though it was dark and cutting. "The only obligation I had was to be honest and professional, which I've done despite your best efforts to provoke me into something ugly. But you know what, George? I don't have any obligation to sit here and be abused by someone who clearly has more issues than a magazine stand." Robert began unhooking his microphone with deliberate, measured movements. Each action was calculated to maximize the dramatic impact. "You want to know what real strength looks like, George? Real strength is walking away from toxic situations. Real strength is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior just because they have a television show." "Robert, please," George said, and for the first time, there was genuine panic in his voice. "Let's start over. We can discuss your new project." "Start over." Robert paused in removing his mic pack and looked at George with something approaching pity. "George, you can't unring this bell. You can't take back the last 20 minutes of your life. You made a choice about who you wanted to be today, and now you have to live with the consequences of that choice." The microphone came free with a small pop of static. Robert held it up for a moment, looking at it like it was something distasteful, then placed it carefully on George's desk. "You know what the saddest part of all this is, George?" Robert said, straightening his jacket with the kind of casual elegance that had made him a movie star. "I came here actually looking forward to talking with you. I thought we might have an interesting conversation about art, about redemption, about the power of second chances. Instead, I got to see what happens when someone gets so consumed by their own bitterness that they forget what it means to be human." George made one final desperate plea. "Robert, we can edit this. We can make this work." "Edit this?" Robert's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. "George, this is live television. The whole world just watched you reveal your true character. There's no editing that. There's no taking it back. There's only living with what you've done." Robert walked toward the edge of the set, then turned back one final time. "I hope whatever satisfaction you got from this was worth it, George, because I have a feeling this is going to follow you for the rest of your career. Every time someone sits in that chair across from you, they're going to remember what happened here today. They're going to remember that George Stephanopoulos is the kind of person who uses his platform to try to destroy his guests." With that, Robert Downey Jr. walked off the Good Morning America set, leaving George Stephanopoulos sitting alone behind his desk, staring into the camera with the expression of a man who had just realized he'd destroyed everything he'd worked for in the span of a single interview. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before someone finally had the presence of mind to cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. The entire confrontation had been broadcast live to millions of viewers, and there was no taking any of it back. So, there you have it. The explosive confrontation that left one of Hollywood's biggest stars walking off live television and a veteran journalist scrambling to salvage what was left of his reputation. What do you think really motivated George's attack on Robert? Was this planned character assassination or just a journalist having the worst day of his career? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories that show what really happens when the cameras are rolling.